Thank you for watching Conscious Consumer Network. The live stream broadcast is free to view. You can pause and rewind live broadcasts to catch up, or view shows at a later date by accessing our free archives of all shows. Check out our broadcast guide to see what's on. You can show your support by donating to our network support fund. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, or subscribe to the monthly newsletter for updates. We thank you for supporting free and independent media.
This is For the Love of Learning, Voices of the Alternative Education Movement. Be inspired by the voices of visionaries, changemakers, and ordinary, extraordinary people who do what they do all for the love of learning.
This is For the Love of Learning, Voices of the Alternative Education Movement. I'm Lainey Liberty, and this is episode number 110. In tonight's episode, we'll explore conscious communication and explore the way we communicate with one another and the effects it has on children, parents, families, and even learning. The key principle of conscious communication is making it as easy as possible for another person to meet one's needs by asking for a specific behavior that will fulfill it. This isn't an inborn gift, but a learnable skill, and many are not adept at expressing their needs, perpetuated within families, classrooms, and workplaces throughout an individual's life. But what are the consequences of not learning conscious communication? When people feel vulnerable, they commonly compensate by becoming demanding and threatening, believing that forcefulness will increase the likelihood of getting what they want. This approach generally has the opposite effect, oftentimes leaving all parties frustrated. Can this frustration affect learning? Is conscious communication a life skill that should be taught and practiced by everyone? We'll ask these questions and more tonight with an amazing panel. And I'm anxious to jump right in, but first I'm going to briefly introduce each of our panelists so we can get the conversation started. But I wanted to remind our audience that you can find out more about tonight's guests on the show or theloveoflearningshow.com, and look for the show notes page for episode number 110. There you will find links to each of our projects and websites. So I'd first like to introduce you to tonight's first panelist, Lori. Lori founded Teach Through Love as a vehicle to empower adults with new tools for communicating with kids. She is a sought-after speaker, trainer, and compassionate parent educator known for her practical communication tools. Lori has dedicated her work to helping parents become the calm, confident leaders they want to be through conscious parenting, inspiration, education, and support. So welcome to tonight's panel, Lori.
Thank you so much for having me.
And next, I'd like to introduce you to Nancy. Nancy is the author of Zany Circus Paradox and co-host of the Literate Child podcast. She is an unschooling mom to 3 quirky people who teach her more about life every day. Welcome, Nancy.
Hey, Lainey. Thanks for having me on the show tonight. Oh, today. Whatever time it is, your time.
That's fair. You're in Australia, so it's evening here in the United States and morning where you are. And it's whatever time it is when people are watching it. We're happy you're on the show. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Angelina. Angelina is currently the founder and director of Organic Beginnings Preschool. She has been in the field of early childhood for nearly 30 years and considers herself to be a preschool revolutionary. She's a teacher training, working primarily on making the classroom more respectful, peaceful, and comforting place for children to be. Her past endeavors included The Little Travelers and teaching classes through soul-centered parenting. She is mother to 2 teenage daughters who have spent half their years in Waldorf schools and unschooling while world traveling. So welcome to tonight's panel, Angelina.
I'm like hitting it. Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
We're so happy you're on the panel too. So next I'd like to introduce you to Maggie. Maggie is an authentic seeking human imprinting at the base of Bighorn Mountains in Wyoming, known as Maggie. By most, her full name is Margaret. She embraces that connections are everything and that the journey towards a more peaceful and compassionately articulate society begins from within and spirals out. She pursues whole life evolution without school in partnership with her nearly 10-year-old son. Maggie blogs at Process, featuring posts published by Life Learning Magazine and Mother Support News for the World Association of Breastfeeding Action. An artist and a writer, she creates when she can and evolves often. So welcome to tonight's panel, Maggie.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And next, I'd like to introduce Ubu. Ubu was on during the pre-show with the connection, so we're all going to cross fingers that he can actually join us at some point during the show. Ubu will be phoning in from England. Ubu is a painter, writer, singer, and player of the ukulele, guitar, and harmonica. He has worked also as an inner city school teacher, as well as an art coach, desert and jungle tour guide, and mentor. He's also studied Buddhist meditation, karate, qigong, archery, yoga, and psychotherapy in Scotland, England, India, Nepal, Australia, New Zealand, Thailand, USA, and Peru. Ubu has many interests, including intuitive psychology of the body and mind, emotions, language, and intuitive communication. He also dabbles in dream work, cartooning, and humor. So we hope, again, fingers crossed, that he's going to be able to join us. And finally, our last panelist tonight is Nova. As far back as Nova can remember, she's been a soul work splunker, diving into the deep caverns of who she is and what she is here for. As a soul alignment coach, she is here to help others to reconnect their deep level of alignment, to live from there, to project from there, to design their life from the inside out from there. Although she specializes in certain mediums, her special magic is in her presence, her energy, and her deep connection. She credits mamahood, specifically revolutionizing that word, her way of showing up as a mama, for her capacity to hold deep-rooted space for herself, her clients, her loved ones, and the world. Welcome, Nova. I'm so sorry I messed up that word. Welcome to tonight's panel.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
You're so very welcome. We are going to start the conversation with you. In everybody's bio, we've talked about the connective communication and also parenthood as being a part of this journey. Can you talk a little bit about how conscious communication actually plays a role in your life and in your professional life?
Mm-hmm. So I think the biggest thing for me now, for me, my conscious communication started with parenting, and it's grown to be even bigger. So like right now, I live tribally with 3 other homeschooling families, unschooling families specifically, on property together here in Austin, Texas. And I think that's been the greatest challenge to authentic communication, being able to relate in community. With my children, it grew from the beginning together, I studied NVC, nonviolent communication, for a long time, and just studying my own processes and how I needed to express the things that I needed to get out, was able to really hold space for my children and their expression, and, did a lot of intentional practices with them to, take care of ourselves and be able to hold space for each other during, communication, whether it's getting our needs met or, solving a conflict or something to that effect. But what happens is, as a family, it's easy. Well, okay, easier. But when you come together with, 3 other families, there's 4 families total. We had 7 adults and 7 children on the property together. And that's been the biggest stretch for us, I think, as far as authentic communication goes, because all of us come with our own styles. And I mean, we all, as unschoolers, also speak, use a lot of NVC and have, similar communication and respect and things like that. But it's definitely been the greatest challenge. And it's amazing. It's such a beautiful opportunity for growth for all of us. Each of us takes, personal responsibility, and we're able to show up for each other in the most incredibly powerful ways. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, very much so. And I have to say, Nova, I facilitate teen communities, and so I understand outside of the family, unit. So because there are other sort of rules that happen when you're not within the family. There's, sometimes for the better or for worse, family, you're obviously more familiar. Sometimes you push buttons easier. Sometimes buttons get pushed in other ways. But if those things aren't modeled within the family first, it's impossible to take it out into a community setting. So I think you're doing a huge service doing this as families. And I'm glad you brought up, again, we'll talk a little bit as the show runs on about NVC, and we'll talk about unschooling, but unschooling doesn't necessarily have to be a part of this, but on through our community, because unlike you, an unschooler, it tends to be an integral part of what we do. So yeah, it was a great introduction, and we got so much to talk about.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I don't like picking on people. Anybody would like to jump in next? Lori, okay. Lori, go ahead and unmute yourself and share with us how conscious communication is something that you find very important to you, the work that you do, and even within your own family. And the floor is yours.
You guys can hear me, right? Oh, now I can't hear you. You know what? Now
We can hear you.
Let me see. Try that. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Is that better? But now I can't hear you guys.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear it?
I don't know what's happened.
You're
I hear
okay.
you. Do you want to come back to me and then I'll figure out, I'll try to get your sound back. Let me try to get my sound.
Yeah. Not a problem. Not a problem. Well, then that means Maggie or Nancy or Angelina?
Sure.
Okay.
For me, conscious communication has been about, it's sort of been about finding a voice within that has been conditioned to be silent or to come across a certain way throughout my life. In the struggles with patriarchy and authoritarianism, and my own deconditioning process in unschooling my son. I have found that that learning to think about the things that I'm saying and the impact that they have upon others is also a way to take responsibility for the imprint that I have on society, for the legacy that I leave. And it's a continuous process because I go through growth spurts all the time. I'm going through one now. I'll probably go through another one this fall. And each time that happens, I find myself reinventing how I see myself, but also how I view others through compassion, through acceptance and an awareness that everybody has a sovereign right to, exist as they are. And, the less that we disagree, and the more that we try to accept how others feel and think, I feel like it helps us all process into, a higher level of existence. And, for me, that's a continuous struggle because I don't want to silence how I feel. And so I have to continuously work at crafting responses, that are considerate, but also true to myself. So for me, it's a continuous battle, both without and within.
Maggie, what I loved about your bio is you talk about conscious communication starting, and that to me I think is a beautiful analogy. Can you hear me? You can hear me, okay. So I think that's a beautiful, did you hear what I said before? No, okay. So what I had said was what your bio said is what I love about what you said in your bio was how conscious communication starts from within and spirals out. And I love that as an analogy so much because it really starts from the center of the listener, right? And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what the responsibility is from the person, who is committing to be a conscious communicator.
Sure. I feel like we all have a child within, and it's our responsibility to heal that child within. Because if we don't, then we are not in tune with or attuned to the things that we need to improve about ourselves, as well as the things in others that we need to accept, instead of bringing our conditioning to the person and how they are. A simple sort of mundane example would be that I always disdained tattoos. Now I want one. But it's a really simple analogy because there are much, things of greater depth that I'm referencing here. But, just in opening my appreciation for instance, in unschooling, how my son views certain things that I might not think are worthwhile. If I can get myself to stop that automatic process of judging and step back and become present and try to, is the sound okay? Okay. If I can try to bring a presence to what he's doing and truly sit down and appreciate it, then I also become a fan of what he's doing. And that translates to other areas of life and other people too. But that my direct experience has been with him. And, then I have to go within and I have to accept those things about myself that I might otherwise shield or, not necessarily bring to the surface out of fear of judgment. And, that going within, in order to truly be authentic, we have to stop editing. We have to stop revising the process. Now, I told you I'm going through a growth spurt, and I'm trying to reconnect with my given name, which was not really used throughout my life, other than doctors, teachers, government, school, and there's a person there that I suppressed when everyone called me Maggie, and I don't mind being called Maggie. That's perfectly fine. It's my my whole lifelong nickname. But if I'm going to be authentic, then I'm going to put this out there and say, this is what I'm thinking about doing. I want to try this on for a while, and it may not be finished and it may not be complete, but this is who I'm going to be at the moment. And so hopefully that's answered what you're after.
That's clearly understand the either Margaret Maggie and with all respect, we'll call you whatever feels right to you. But I get it. I changed my name legally, my last name, and it's been changed for 10 years, so I know what that means. I know how it feels. It feels a little strange to be somebody else. So I get it. So thank you for honoring us with that. Lori, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Back, I'm here.
Yeah, and share with us a little bit about your relationship to
So my journey really came from my own personal healing and investigation, because I was that kid that was always too sensitive. And so I heard, and I grew up in a really verbally violent home and family, not always so negative, just even when they were happy and loving, it was just really loud and aggressive. So, and I'm super sensitive. So I just was always hearing more than what was being said, or hearing what wasn't being said, or I was confused by what I was hearing because it didn't match what I was feeling or what I was intuiting, because I was just always picking up that sort of stuff. And so understanding my sensitivity led me to realize that not everybody communicates. Also, I left my home, I went to college, I moved away from my family, and I realized that, hey, the rest of the world doesn't actually communicate in this way. So and then I sort of, advocacy was really my goal. I never actually thought I would be a parent educator in terms of parenting, because I didn't think I would have kids. But for me, it was about, we have to change the way that we speak, that this emotional and verbal violence and abusive way that we treat each other. I mean, even on television, you see, episodic TV, that people use humor as a way to, I guess it's entertainment, but at the same time, what are we teaching our kids, or what are we really steeping ourselves in? So my journey just really came out of wanting to connect more authentically and be understood and communicate and express myself. I didn't know how to express myself. So we teach what we most need to learn, right? So I think for me, that's really what it was about, not having any models, not having any good examples, but wanting to pass on something different and break that cycle in my family.
Yeah, I think the modeling aspect, as I was talking to Nova in the beginning, is powerful, but you had modeling that was completely contrary to the path you chose.
Yes, definitely. And I felt a lot of responsibility for other people and for their emotions and for their actions. And so now with families, it's so easy for me to hear the pain that because I am a parent and because I was that kid who was sensitive or who was just misunderstood, when we misunderstand our children's behavior. So I think if we could just translate all of the blame and the shame and the judgment and the guilt that's just unconscious, if we can sort of understand where that's coming from, and like everyone is saying, connect to needs and, you know, feelings. And NVC has been, that sort of put a format and a framework around what I felt intuitively and what I had come to understand about behavior and about communication. And so when I found NVC actually because of my daughter's preschool. And there was parent education classes there that focused on using this NVC model in parenting. And I was like, wow, this is like exactly in alignment with everything that I believe in. And we were just sort of drawn to this wonderful space. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Lori. And Nancy, I'd love to just pop on over to you and have you share a little bit about your journey and what conscious communication, the role that it plays in your life.
Okay. Sorry, my voice is a bit funny today. I was very lucky because I grew up in a house where we were respected, all the children. I had a large family, and it was a very diplomatic family environment. We were respected for our opinions. We made large decisions as a family. And but then when I went out into the wider world, like school and other people's houses, as a child, I was absolutely outraged by the fact that most of the world didn't function like that. Especially in school, I did not handle school very well at all. I, at the age of 10, stood on a chair and gave my teacher a lecture about respect, and then climbed out a window and walked home. So I when I had my own kids, I was 16 when I had my oldest Anthea. She's 15 in a couple of weeks. And I did not want my children to go through any of that at all. And even though I toned down a lot, there was still that part of me, and still is, that feels outraged that the world isn't the way that it could be if more people were willing to have the world be that way. And to me, respectful communication is very important, and it doesn't always mean being nice. And I think that's a problem that parents have when they go into nonviolent communication or parenting respectfully, and they keep thinking you have to be nice all the time and respond to things with, oh, everything's wonderful, but it's not that at all. It's about being genuine and authentic, and not coming from a place of judgment or criticism, and just coming from a place of understanding and honesty. And I think honesty and understanding that other people's perceptions and anything they're going through, regardless of whether or not you personally agree with it, is just as valid as your own. And I think a large part of communicating respectfully is not just watching how you communicate, but is also understanding where the person you're communicating to is coming from, and their understanding, their interpretation of what you're saying, in the same way as you wouldn't speak to a 50-year-old the same way you would speak to a toddler. All people communicate in different ways, and I think where people fall short a lot of the time is they're so wrapped up in how they communicate themselves that they're forgetting that the other half of the transaction may or may not be receptive to being communicated to in that way. And I think that's something that's very important to talk about with respectful communication. So, yeah. Oh, also I have 3 kids, and yes, I didn't really talk much about how I use that in my own life, more about, sorry, it's really off-putting seeing all you guys and not being able to hear you. It's kind of freaking me out. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
I think maybe Lanny is frozen. So maybe I'll just go ahead and go and do my intro. Nancy, thank you for that. So I will just say that for me, can you guys hear me? It is weird because it's so muted. Okay. So my coming to this work was sort of out of contrast. I was raised by German immigrants, and things were definitely, I wouldn't say respectful in our house. My mom was one of those very iron-fisted, do it when I say so, and ruled really out of disrespect. And so from a very young age, I just remember thinking, I will never treat my children like this. I will never be like this as a mother. So, I mean, I made that decision very young, and then, I did. I ended up with a degree in child development and then a graduate degree in psychology because I really wanted to grasp, how to get into sort of the psyche and how to do it differently. So by the time my children came around, I was very clear that this is how I was going to raise them. I was going to raise them with respect, and it was going to be, a totally different kind of environment. And I was an unschooler at heart. I never thought my kids would go to school. And they're the ones who, this is part of respect. At one point we were living in Kauai and surfing, body surfing every day, and all I heard from my girls was, when are we going to move back to the mainland so we can go to school? So that's part of respect, right? To not have my own agenda and to say, look, I hated school. It's not a respectful place. And like the intro said, they were in Waldorf schools half the years. We'd gone like 5 years, and they're 15 and 17. And the rest of the years we did world school, just unschool. But they were always wanting to go back to school. So that's also part of the respect. And then I was just going to say, one of the things I love about working with preschoolers so much, and why I kind of focus my attention right in there, is because, as Margaret mentioned, this wounded inner child that many of us adults have that grew up in disrespectful environments. The young ones coming in don't have that. And if we can, give them these skills right from the beginning, the majority of preschoolers I have in my vicinity are far better communicators than their parents. They are not passive aggressive. They don't hide. They don't, all these little things that adults have learned to do, and they're all yeah, and then behind their back are saying things. The preschoolers are so just honest with each other and so direct, and I just love it. I love it so much to see them, learn right from the beginning. So that's how I came to it.
I think that that Angelina has really touched upon a core issue in our society. And I can use as a comparison my experience with radical unschooling. My 9-year-old is a far better communicator than most of the adults that I know. And that happens to be the case with just about all of the unschoolers that I've ever met. But it's not just the unschooling, it's the responsiveness and the respect that they get. We're building connection by respecting our kids. And most of the adults we know, including ourselves, for the most part, except for maybe Nancy to some degree, we did not get that respect, and our choices were not respected, and we were taught that we can't trust our choices. And so we learned to, go with the crowd, and then before you know it, we're rebelling as teens. And I think what the world really needs is across the board healing of those children from within, so that we can change the dynamic and change the language and the discourse, for addressing problems. It never fails. For me, I don't want to come across to people like, oh, I've got it down with radical unschooling or whole life, evolution, and this is the answer. But, when I look at what I'm seeing other parents struggling with, or, what I look at what I'm seeing my child do compared to, kids that don't have his freedoms do, and how he feels about himself, it's night and day. And so, I think Nancy was talking about the need for honesty, and there's a lot of pain that we've all glossed over as a society. And, we have partners who are in pain, and we have colleagues and friends who are in pain, and, we see other children in pain. And, so sometimes, we may have to, jolt people awake. And I feel like I kind of did this recently with a friend. My son and her daughter are friends, and they don't see each other too often. She goes to school, but she's a very animalistic child, and her mother is very animalistic. They're very grounded to natural, feeling drives them, and they're very strong spirited. And she wanted a fidget spinner. And I didn't know this. My son had 3, and he gave her one. And when the mother, my friend, found out, she was like, "Oh no, you can't have that. Those are stupid." And I immediately, I love this person, and she's a very, like I say, very animalistic. And the reason I use that term is because she's very sensual by nature, but yet she has suppressed that in herself, and in modeling that, she's suppressing it in her daughter. And so I did the first thing that came to mind, and I went up to her and I grabbed her necklace, and I said, "That is such a stupid necklace. Why would you want to wear that necklace?" And our older son was standing there, and he was like, "Aha," and I felt like it was not unkind the way I did it. It was just to make a point, and she knows me well enough to know that I care a lot about her and that I wasn't trying to hurt her. However, it did make the point, that by judging what her daughter, likes, she's creating a big disconnection.
Margaret, I'm going to ask you about reaction. What is the point between, where's the fine line between somebody being in a reaction mode and actually taking that to being triggered to some automatic story that plays? You talked about your friend having this animalistic nature. Is that a story or a mode that just sort of started to play with your friend? Oh, that's stupid, this, something disapproving. Is that a trigger point? Or, can you talk a little bit about how those things sort of intersect?
I'm not really sure I understand what you're asking. Can you maybe rephrase?
Yeah, and I'm probably not communicating very clearly. For me, it seems as if when we're communicating, we communicate consciously when we're not triggered. And when we're triggered, we're playing a reaction, a story, or a mode of being that is kind of programmed. Yeah? And what is the point where we can react without tapping into that trigger point or that story?
Well, I think it just takes experience going within. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. We all have to start somewhere. For me, I'd like to say it's a little easier. Well, actually, it wasn't, because I raised my stepdaughters from a very authoritarian perspective. And I got a second chance when their baby brother came along. And, it was only then that I, discovered things like nonviolent communication or attachment parenting was the door for me. And so I started out learning about responsiveness and how we do respond instead of react. And I think that point, it comes from the healing process. It comes from recognizing that your needs weren't met, and that you've been conditioned into these automatic responses from parenting, from school, from even churches, whatever has been spoon-fed to you as right or wrong. and that you've been told not to question. So I think that we have to start somewhere. And for me, it was just with responsiveness. I'm not sure if that's the avenue you were wanting to head down or not.
I was just wanting to jump in and say that I really get where you're coming from, Margaret, with everything you were saying and feeling that need to, when you see a situation and you feel like it's unjust, to step in and somehow rectify it. And I used to be very reactionary, especially as a teenager. And I was given the best advice ever by my mum, which is don't fight for your rights, just live them. And even though, I mean, it could be taken literally, but I don't think it was supposed to. And I just think that's a really good thing to keep in mind when you have those moments where you can feel yourself being triggered, because you can usually tell in yourself, even if you can't identify where the trigger comes from, that it is a trigger moment. And if you can just remember that you don't have to save the world, you don't have to step into every situation. And usually, as I learned the wrong way, by stepping in, coming from a place of aggression or outrage, as I was saying before, people are not receptive to that. And then it's really hard to close that feedback loop of communication when what you're actually doing is forcing that person to put up all their blocks, and their brain immediately starts trying to find all the reasons why you're wrong, because then they're getting major cognitive dissonance. And even if they wanted to hear what you're trying to say to them, which is well-meaning and beautiful, they literally won't, because their whole belief system is too wound up in proving you wrong to really be able to listen to what you're saying. And so I found that I think I'm very similar to you. I would totally, at some point, that whole, well, your necklace is stupid thing, that's hilarious. Like, I'm sorry, but it is. But sadly, most people don't react well to that. And but I love the fact, I love when people feel that need to step in and somehow rebalance the situation. And I just think that the best way that we can do that is by example, and by just remembering to maybe keep it not personal about the other person, and maybe share a story about yourself where you've maybe not handled something as well and then learned another way. So I think Nova wants to say something, which would be cool.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I wanted to share a story. So I actually do want to back up a little bit, because we're talking about the younger children and preschool and stuff. And so I got my degree in psychology, and then I went back to school for child development, and I specialized in infant toddlers, because I found that if we could go straight to the root and start from the beginning, that there was so much less to fix later, right? If we started off on the right foot and then just continued on that foot. And the preschool that or I should say the child development center that I worked at, was at a community college in San Diego, and it was incredibly progressive. And the teachers there were just incredible, and it was so connective. And we learned, I mean, these incredible ways of just honoring tiny babies, like involving them in dialogue around changing their diapers and getting consent before doing things with them, not to them. And it was just a really deep, connected program that was amazing. So, I have done my best to implement those things, same things with my children, my younger two specifically. I learned all of this when my oldest was a little bit older. She was 8 when I found unschooling, and then kind of moved from there. But my younger children, I've always, done this stuff with them from the beginning. And so, and I'm not perfect. And I would, mostly around cleaning, I'd be like, I'm such a mess, da, 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 da. I'd freak out, and I'd have my freak out. And I remember Scott Noel had posted this thing, eons ago, about like not yelling at the person, but just kind of like yelling, if you have to yell, just kind of like, sending it out into the universe rather than laser zooming in on somebody, right? And so I was just like, I'm freaking out, it's a mess, I need to clean, blah, blah, blah. And my son looks at me, and I think he was 7, and he goes, Mom, I can tell you're really upset right now, and I'm not going to get mad that you're yelling. And I was just like, whoa, like my whole everything just I was like deflated. It was just gone. And it was just so profound to me how he was able to hold that space for me while I was, losing my shit basically, and having my own triggers and my own stuff. And it just was this reminder of how I can hold space for people when they're, having their processes and they're, experiencing their emotions and expressing in the way that's the best that they can at the time, being able, like, and this comes again to like the work that I do around soul alignment, around if I'm in alignment, then it's so easy for me to hold space for people. And when I'm not in alignment, when I'm off, when I have, when I didn't get enough sleep or I haven't been eating well or, whatever it is, that's all these little things that get me out of alignment, then it's harder for me to hold that space for people. And it kind of reminds me of kind of what we do here on the property where, we've had, conflicts that have come up, but when it comes down to it, the relationship is what's most important. And so we're able to forgive each other of their missteps and their, not perfect selves. Like being able to show up again authentically isn't about being perfect. And it's about, being able to express ourselves in the best way that we can at the time. And everybody holds space for that person or those people and calling in help if we need it. And then afterwards being able to learn the lessons from it and then, hopefully move in a different direction in the future. But it's always about being able to come back together. So yeah, that was kind of everything that I've been thinking while I've been listening to you. Lovely, is all condensed into one story.
I've had so many thoughts since listening to everybody like you, Nova. It's just like they keep going and going. And then I'm trying to find light because I'm losing light as we go on. But I just wanted to comment on how, and because you're all speaking of unschooling, and I'm not an unschooler, but my daughter does go to a very small private progressive school because we left public education for many of the reasons, one of which being the environment was not suitable for young children. And so while some of us have made those choices to keep our kids out of that environment for many reasons, not everybody chooses that, not everybody can that. So I'm really passionate about bringing this work into the wider world and bringing it into schools. And you guys that are teachers or that are out communicating with teachers and bringing it to them, I think it's so, so important. I remember when my daughter was in first grade, it was her first experience in public school in sort of just a big traditional environment. She'd gone to very conscious community in her earlier years. Every place was very conscious community. And she came home from school, excuse me, her teacher was sort of, her first grade teacher was sort of a very stiff and not very warm and cuddly, and not that makes, no judgment on that. It was just a personality sort of mismatch for my daughter, who's very sensitive and wants to, sort of connect in these ways. But she was very observant of the classroom and the other kids and their emotions and their feelings. Again, sensitive kids, I think, are just like that. And so they have the red light, green light sort of behavioral systems where they move the kids on the red and the green, and she would notice all the children getting put on these different colors. And one day she came home and she talked about a little boy who went up to her teacher, and she said that she came home and she told me that her teacher didn't even give him a chance. She just told him to go sit down, and she said she didn't even ask him about his feelings or his needs. And for my 6-year-old to recognize that her classmate had feelings and needs, and to be able to express that to me and to notice and recognize that the teacher was not able to connect. For me, that is the emotional intelligence that we have the opportunity to offer our children and to develop is so amazing. And at the same time, it did offer me, even though it was not an experience that I wanted for her, it did offer me the opportunity to dive in deeper to what the teacher actually needed. and why. And so, for example, when the children were being constantly moved to the yellow for their behavior, we talked about how people communicate differently in different environments. And so the school did not communicate in the same way that we communicate at home. They weren't necessarily interested in the feelings and needs, but I tried to help my daughter look at the teacher's feelings and needs as well, so that she could recognize that even though the communication was not something that we would model, that we would repeat, that teacher still had those underlying needs. So what did she need in her classroom when she was, putting these children, asking them to move their clothespin? What was she trying to communicate? What did she need? And so having this conversation and discovering with her that the teacher had to get things done on time. She was worried about her schedule maybe. She was trying to keep order in the classroom because that helps keep everyone focused. Just having the conversation was so much more important than even just the experience, because the way she got to process it. So I know that our kids have so much more in them and to offer, and that the environment that we, soak them in, it does have an effect. So if we can bring this work into the greater world and spread it out, I mean, we're fine-tuning it and living it and trying to be authentic and learning in our homes, in our, in our smaller communities. But I really love when we get to do shows like this and share it with the wider world for people that aren't in those, really conscious and sort of those communities that are very supportive, because a lot of people aren't. And I know there's so much judgment of parents out there. So just a couple of thoughts. Oh, and I wanted to say one thing to what Nancy said, because I loved, I think it was Nancy, when you said, your mom said, don't fight for your rights, just live them. I love that, because I think as parents, if we cannot be, or just as people, if we cannot be offended by other people and how they're perceiving us or what they're saying about us, and then we don't have to go out and fight for it. We just live in our own authenticity. So I just love the way she phrased that. And I think that, like you said, was a wonderful, amazing lesson. So I'm going to share that one.
So that's perfect. That's I was just going to say something about the judgment as well. So one of the things that worked just really well for my kids, because mine also went to, sometimes they went to school and sometimes they didn't. So for me, because I was an unschooler at heart, when mine wanted to go to school, it was 100% their choice every single day, and it is to this day. And they're both in school right now, going into senior year and sophomore year, but it's their choice. So, I mean, one of mine last year she never missed a day because she wanted to, and, it's whatever it is. It's just our kids have our own thing that they come in with. That's never been a priority for me at all in any way, shape, or form, but they have their thing. And so giving them the space to do whatever is important to them, whether or not I think that that's important or not. But when they were young, one of the things, I remember when she was 5, my oldest was 5, and she's one of those very straight-laced children just naturally. She likes to do the right thing and likes that, I think it's why she likes school. So she came home one day, and there was a little girl who kicked the teacher, and she had on cowboy boots with the little girl. And so in the car ride home, she was so animated, and this little girl kicked the teacher, and blah, 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 blah. And so I know a lot of parents kind of struggle with how do you respond to this? Do you start with stories? But what I would always say to her was, oh, do you think you will ever do that to the teacher? And she would be like, no. But it gave her permission to make her own decisions about it. I wasn't going to put a judgment on it of that's not nice, that's not right, that's not what we do. I'm glad you didn't do that. I just didn't go there at all. And the only thing I would ever say when she would tell me these stories to these other kids is, do you think you will ever do that? And it just neutralized it so much to, she's like, no. But she knew for me, it wasn't, she wasn't looking for my approval or all those things and to put a judgment on it. And so another story, my sister has 2 children, and they're all a year apart. So my 2 girls and her 2 girls overlap and, exactly a year apart. And they happen to be fundamentalist Christians that have a lot of I guess there was a lot of rules, one could say. Like, we ate bacon in our house, and we had a lot of fairies in the house. And so those little girls at a young age, when they were just 2 and 4, they would tell my girls a lot, like, you're going to go to hell if you eat bacon because it's in the Bible. And my girls would be like, oh, no, this is the kind from Whole Foods. This isn't the kind Grandma eats. They thought for sure that cleared them. So all this idea of heaven and hell, and they would, come with all these judgments. And I remember this one time I was just in the kitchen listening to their conversation. They were all eating, and it came up again. And my 5-year-old said, oh, this again? How many times do we have to tell you? You believe what you believe in. We believe what we believe in. It's not the same thing. And then they just went on and kept eating. To me at 5, I was like, oh my God, that's like a parenting win, right? There was no, you're right, you're wrong, I'm wrong. It was just like, oh, remember, we already told you. We have different beliefs. Like, let's move on, let's not waste time on this. So to me, that's like a big crux of the whole part about the conscious communication is the not trying to convince that other, party of like, no. Like, you don't understand. Like, I have my point and you need to hear it. Is to just say, I've got mine, you've got yours. Like, let's find something we both like to do. In a lot of ways, when they're young, is really, to me, ideal, that they're not wasting time on justification.
Angelina and Lori, I just have to say I love how switched on your kids are, and they're awesome, awesome stories. And talking about the judgment thing, Angelina, that you were speaking about, just kind of reminds me of, because parenting and education is so, you can't really separate them. I mean, you could, and some people do, but I don't think it would be wise. They're two sides of the same coin. And I think when we're communicating with our kids, one thing that is really, really important to me personally is to be very, very, very careful to not intentionally or unintentionally shame a child for thinking or believing or feeling a certain way. I think out of everything, that's possibly the most damaging thing you could do, because kids are innocent. They might do weird things that are maybe inconvenient or messy or could come across as rude to people who don't understand that child. But I just think the worst thing you could ever do to a child is to shame them and make them feel guilt. And the judgment thing comes into that, because a lot of parents, I don't think any of you guys, I just think other people in general, do have a tendency to cover their own embarrassment or to look like a better parent if they're out or whatever, would tend to jump in and shame their child in certain situations rather than just cop people's judgment. And this is something I see a lot when we're out, and it makes me feel really uncomfortable. And I just think it's so good that there are people like you guys who are sharing how you feel about communication and sending out that message of non-judgment, and having kids that are, can see other people's perspectives and do have compassion, so that the next generation maybe won't have so much of that around.
I think one of the keys to conscious communication with children, whether it be education or parenting, is to view them as partners. And when my friend with the necklace fidget spinner, when that happened, I want to qualify that that's not how I'd approach, just the generic individual, but this was a friend. And, afterwards we talked about how she is a mirror of her daughter, or her daughter is a mirror of her, a reflection of her. And that it doesn't mean that what she sees in her daughter matches herself. It means that what she's seeing in her daughter matches how her daughter's being treated, or what she's doing to, to maybe elicit that behavior in our daughter when things aren't going well. And so we did talk about that, but I think that if we can, as a society, remove the hierarchy and see ourselves as partners even before parents and educators, then that will help provide a more seamless process for what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. And we touched on so many things here that, we could take this conversation so many is if we're not talking about the norm, right? We're talking about there's a culture out there of shaming, putting kids, on the corner, wearing signs when they did something wrong, or putting them in clothes to make a point. We're talking about a culture where it's accepted to shame children, and that, addresses a lot of what Nancy was saying. If nonviolent communication and some of the things, conscious communication, is not part of the cultural norm, what can we do when we come across teachers or parents or even children who have only been modeled to in a way that is really unconscious? How can we as conscious communicators interact with a culture where the norm is not conscious communication? Lori, the floor is yours.
So I have a lot of experience because I'm around a lot of really feisty, judgmental people. And I feel like I have turned a corner with so many of them because empathy. When I don't react, when I hear that judgment and that blame, and it's hard. I'm not saying it's not, and that I'm always able to stay in that space. But when I hear that and I can translate it and then hear the pain or what's really being said and then just respond to that with just non-judgment, whether I'm making an observation or I'm just saying that must be really hard or I'm sorry to hear that, people soften. So I can't go out there and change the world, right? I can't go out there. I can preach, but, I'm preaching to the choir. I find that when we're living this stuff is when people change. I've had relationships change that other people will experience the very same person in the judgmental, critical way, but that person with me now is open and loving and responsive and willing to hear because that's what I've been able to give back to them. Even just with I had my elderly grandmother who in her old age now is sometimes like a complainer and like nobody, sometimes it's hard to listen to her because everybody thinks that she just wants to complain and they're like, oh, stop. I call her and I just say those things. I say, wow, Grandma, that must be so hard. And she just melts and she stops. She just suddenly feels heard. And then the need to just stay in that negative space, whatever that is for her, transforms. So for me, I feel like when we're not necessarily in a culture that's supporting it, but the more that we live it and don't get offended by the people who can't, the more that it will change. And obviously by, raising children who are just living it and able to have that emotional intelligence to deal with others, that will help too. But in the meantime, that's been my best defense is empathy and not taking offense from other people. So I just wanted to add that.
I'm not perfect, and I know that others have said that, but one of the greatest growth spurts that I've had has been in trying to give empathy to someone who was totally wired into narcissism as a child and cannot express empathy back, is not capable of empathy and never will be. And so, in practicing that, and I'm trying to keep, personal details personal here, but in practicing having a relationship with that individual, what Lori's saying has served me greatly and has, taught me to take a step back and calm down. And I've been amazed at the results that has. And we have far too many people that are being raised through those formative years without being modeled empathy, and therefore they are, no matter, some of us will spend our lives trying to change them and help them and fix them when they can't be repaired. And that's the sad lot that brings us to needing this, to needing conscious communication so much in our society.
So one of the things I just want to say, sometimes, if we read the situation, sometimes just humor, I think, can really break it. Like there was a situation last year where my 9th grader was working on set, and there were parents there, and we were all kind of painting, and there's this mother who's particularly aggressive and destructive, and she's just, a piece of work that everyone is like, oh my God, here she comes. So there she was with her daughter, just laying into her daughter. Everything the daughter did was like, you're getting paint over there, you're blah, 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 you're stunned. Everyone else is doing such a good job. And just like berating this poor girl, right? And the girl acts out all the time, and because of course this mother. So, everyone knows I'm a preschool teacher and blah, blah, blah. So I couldn't not step in, but to step in a really serious way. This woman is also an extreme narcissist, so there's no dealing with or rationalizing. She's like, call the police on the teacher. She's just drama central, right? So how do you reach someone like that? We couldn't all just sit there and let this girl take all this because it was just too uncomfortable. So I just, to break it, went into a place of humor and, became like the preschool teacher and went up to the girl who's, again, a 9th grader who's like as big as I am, a large girl. But I just started treating her a little bit like a preschooler and said, what your mommy meant to say, Sweet Pea, is she sees you're working really hard on the painting and she's thinking you're doing a good job. And I was like, right, Mom? And did like winky face, and it broke the mom. It broke her cycle of just this barrage of like, oh my gosh, this negativity. But I think had I come up against that mother and said, it's really inappropriate, you're like really, really mean to your daughter, like stop it, there, it would have just gone into a power struggle. But taking on this kind of humorful role and, sort of like stroking the little girl's hair, and I kept winking at Mom, going, right, Mom? You're thinking she's doing the best she can, right, Mom? And some of the other parents around just started laughing, but the mom got it. She got the message, and it was, she subsided. And it was in a way that, it didn't escalate into some like horrific battle. So I think it's just kind of knowing our situation sometimes, and sometimes humor can just be the thing that kind of cuts it. It doesn't have to always be so serious for everyone around to kind of get that, you know what? Enough, Mom.
Ooh. Sorry, I just realized my AC is still running, so let me turn my car off. Hopefully you can hear me. Okay. So I think for myself, there's been a couple different things that have been really helpful for me when I'm, engaging with somebody who's, not as conscious around language or behavior, I guess you could say. And I think the biggest thing is NVC for me, nonviolent communication, just being able to listen to them with full heart and respect and listening for what their needs are underneath what they're saying. With nonviolent communication, you don't need both people to participate to be able to transmute a situation. And I just remember so many stories of Marshall Rosenberg sharing, examples of how he was able to use NVC to really validate somebody, their issues or concerns in a way that was able to bring them to a place of peace so that they could communicate in a different way. I also think of this story, and I can't remember exactly who it was that told it, but I believe it was a woman that was on a plane, and there was another mother on there, and she had 2 or 3 young children, and she was really snapping at them, and people were kind of giving her dirty looks because she was being so mean to them. And this woman that was on the plane decided that this mom, maybe she needed some help. And she went over and she was just like, hey, do you need some help? And the mom was like, just started crying. And she was just like, yeah, I had all these issues happen, and I haven't slept in like over 24 hours, and I've been, on these planes with these kids all by myself, and, and so the woman just took care of the kids so the mom could take a nap while they flew. And I just thought, what a beautiful way of being able to show up for people. Like, I know with my kids, my 2 younger kids, if they're having an issue, if I hear, them yelling or I hear anything, I'll come in and I'll say, hey, do you guys need some help? And allow them to, to initiate whether or not they figure they want to do it themselves or they can use some help with it. And yeah, I mean, what happens on the property a lot that's really cool is because we have, a bunch of kids that have all been raised by different parents. And it's really cool to hear them being able to figure stuff out amongst themselves also. So, I think that oftentimes for myself, I will catch myself feeling like I need to get involved. And instead, if I just sit back and watch the kids and see how they figure it out amongst themselves, where everybody feels good about what's going on, then it's just absolute magic, and I didn't need to be there at all. In fact, the adults on the property here, we don't get involved in pretty much any of the kids' stuff. They figure it out amongst themselves. And that, we've been doing this, I've been here for 8 months now. So we started off by, helping engage in conversations that would be helpful for the kids to be able to figure things out themselves, help them facilitate that. And now they have their own agreements amongst themselves about how they handle things and what they do and stuff, and it's just amazing. And I think that for me, being able to learn from my kids has been amazing. Yesterday I was driving with one of the other moms, and we had 2 of the boys from the property, and somebody, I think I was talking, and one of the little boys said, can you stop talking now? He's like 4. And I was like, sure. And then he wanted to say something. And I thought, wow, what kind of an amazing world would we live in if somebody was talking and I could just say, hey, could you stop talking now? It was just kind of funny to be able to be so authentic without it having to mean anything, right? Like it doesn't have, it doesn't mean, just like, hey, like I'd like to say something or something. I don't know. I was just thinking how funny that was. But, I just feel like there's so much that I've learned from my kids, and it really helps me to be able to even relate with other adults too. I really, really loved Lori's story about how she was able to talk with her daughter about the teacher and be able to see the teacher's needs. I have done that so many times with my kids when, when dads or moms at parks are, speaking to their kids in a way that we don't usually speak with each other. And my son will be like, oh, wow, that dad was mean. And I was like, oh, I wonder what was going on with him. What do you think? Maybe he was, kind of worried about something, or it sounded like he was a little bit stressed, or, different things like that, so that we can be empathetic to the other parent also. Because my number one job in this world is to really, help my children be able to navigate situations in a way that's, that's going to benefit their future. And I love being able to have these opportunities, honestly, to be able to talk with my kids about these things. I don't look at these kinds of situations as hindrances. I look at them as blessings and opportunities. So my kids and I have, this opportunity to speak about this kind of stuff.
Yeah, thank you. Wow. We're going to take a short break, and we're going to be back in about 6 minutes to continue the conversation.
Welcome to Invisible World. My name's Jay, and I'm really glad that you've joined me on this journey. I really appreciate all the messages, all the feedback, and all the interaction and the comments that we've had. And today what I'm going to share with you is a how-to video. These are the tips and tricks to actually practically apply all of the themes and topics that I share in my presentations. So the video that I recently released called Be the Change, I was talking about speaking to people with empathy, speaking to people with compassion, and actually connecting with people on a different level. I want to share with you some really practical and relevant advice on how the way you communicate with someone can actually positively impact them and also positively impact yourself as well. So I want to start off by asking you a couple of questions. You can reflect on these as I speak, or maybe you can write them down. And the first one is, can you think of a time when you said something and later on felt, I wish I never said that? Right? We've all had those moments when you say something and then afterwards you think, I really wish I never said that. The second question I want you to ask yourself is, has there ever been a time when you wanted to express something, but actually you resisted, you restricted yourself from sharing that? Just write these down or think about them as I speak. One of my biggest tips is never reply when you're angry. Now I know that's tough. When you're angry, you really want to react, you really want to respond. But actually we all know that a moment of patience in a moment of anger saves you 100 moments of regret. Right? We've all experienced that in our lives, and that's exactly what we want to stop here. The best way to do that is a 5-step acronym. It's called THINK. The first thing you have to think about is it true? Is what you're saying truthful, based on fact and objective, or is it actually based on a subjective opinion? This will actually help you decipher whether you want to use those words or not. The next thing you need to think about is the H. Is it helpful? Is what you're saying beneficial to the person? Are they going to feel that what you're saying is digestible, easily applicable, and actually practical and relevant to their situation? The third thing you need to think about is I. Is it inspiring? Are they going to feel transformed by what you're saying? Are they going to feel like they want to make a difference? Are they going to feel that they actually want to change their behavior, change their habits, and improve themselves? Is it inspiring? Ask yourself that question. The next thing you need to ask yourself is it necessary? Funnily enough, we all believe that everything we have to say is necessary, but in reality, we can actually let a lot of things go. And therefore we have to really think about this one. This is a really important point. Maybe that person can learn from their experience. Maybe someone's mentioned it to them before. Maybe they're already trying to tackle this change. Really reflect on whether what you have to say is necessary. And the fifth and final point is, who knows this person best? Are you the best placed person to share this information? Or is there actually someone else who will be able to influence them in a much better way? If you apply these 5 principles at any given time, you will make your communication much more conscious. Visualize this acronym THINK and make yourself stop to think whenever you're challenged with a given situation. Remember, never reply when you're angry. And if you are going to reply, do it with this acronym. First thing, is it true? Is it helpful? Is it inspiring? Is it necessary? And do you know that person best? Figure that out first and make your communication conscious. The second principle in being the change and transforming our lives is actually never make a promise when you're happy. Now I know that may sound counterintuitive or slightly strange, but actually when we're happy, when we're feeling positive, we have this tendency to overpromise or overpromise that we can over-deliver. And what that does is that it creates expectations that never existed before, and we overcomplicate our lives. The way to do this is actually to create more balance in the way we receive and respond to things going well and things going negatively. We have this thing that when we have a negative experience, we feel really down and depressed. And when we have positive experience, we are at the opposite end of the scale. We have to learn to build balance in our lives and become equipoised in both happiness and sadness. The reason is that both of them are interchangeable and both of them happen throughout the course of life. And the third and final principle for conscious communication to be the change is never make a decision when you're sad. We all have this tendency to make big claims, big decisions, and say big things when we're feeling down and sad. You've done it before, I've done it before, we've all been there. How do we stop ourselves from doing this? It's actually developing an internal dialogue. So the next time you're feeling down and wanting to make a big decision, write down to yourself why you believe you made negative decisions in the past when you're in that position. Think about the negative consequences you've created for yourself, so that next time your mind decides to want to make a decision when you're sad, you'll be able to remind yourself of how that's not worked for you before. A lot of this requires a regulated lifestyle. It requires meditation and mindfulness and actually building up a stable clarity of mind. And so actually a lot of this will be affected by how you spend the rest of your day, who you interact with, what you read, and what you actually absorb throughout the day. I hope that some of these tips have been useful, and I look forward to sharing a lot more with you as well. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. I really want you to get involved in this conversation and this dialogue as we think out loud together about our minds in this world. So please join and subscribe today. Look forward to you joining me.
So we hope that you enjoyed that video and give you some ideas on how to implement conscious communication from your own experiences. I think it would be really beneficial if we came back this hour and started talking a little bit about sharing some tools that people can use if this is a new concept to them. So I'm just going to open up the floor. I know, Lori, you wanted to come out of the gate and share some of the stuff that you do in your practice. But afterwards, I'm going to just invite our panelists to share more tools that are accessible to anybody who really wants to make a commitment to this kind of communication.
So just really quickly, I know that parents in my work, parents like to have things that are really easy and accessible. And so I like to make things that are easy and accessible. And since the name of my work is Teach Through Love, I created a tool that I call the Teach Tool. And it sort of just outlines for us the steps, the process that we can use to connect with our kids and use and model respectful communication. So it's teach, and the T stands for take a moment, breathe. So this is where we just step back and observe what's going on. And these very much follow the principles of NVC and getting to the root cause. So T, take a breath and observe. Just don't say anything. I usually let whatever's coming into your head, just let it come. I think so many times parents, like Nancy said earlier, like you think that we have to be all sweet and kind and say things, and no, we can be limit setters and leaders and still be respectful. But we have to take that moment. We have to be able to just look at the situation and notice what's going on, maybe name what we see, but without all of the judgment. And then the E is empathize, right? So just take a moment to put yourself in the other person's shoes, whether you're talking to an adult or to a child. TEA is for acknowledge what's going on, acknowledge those needs that you recognize, whether it be a need for connection, whether it just be the lack of skill and the child needing attention or wanting to express something that they can. If we could just move our focus from that behavior to just acknowledging that need, then we can get to the C, which is where we connect to problem solve. But we can't do any of that problem solving unless we do the first 3 steps. So I always tell people, hang out, have a cup of tea, because the TEA is where we want to stay. And then when everybody's regulated, when we feel like we're calm, we can then connect, problem solve, brainstorm. Wasn't what I was expecting to happen. What did you want to happen? What do you think we could do next? Because then everybody's willing and able to hear other people's points of views, and we're able to think again, right? Because our thinking brains are actually back online. Whereas when we're reactive, when we're resisting, when we're trying to control kids or blame it, everybody is in this very resistant, reactive place, and we can't learn. And then the last step, the H, is help your child. I think that so many times we, as parents, we say things once and then we just expect cooperation. We just expect obedience. We just expect people to do what we want. And especially with young children, they need help, right? So don't just say it from across the room with empathy, but go over and say, I can see that you're having a hard time. I'm going to help you. I'm going to help you stop your body, or I'm going to sit with you while you're, regulating, or we're going to find a tool to do it together. So I think the help is important, because we wait so long for kids to sort of get on board with us or agree with our limits, instead of going in and saying, I see that you're struggling. I'm going to set this boundary, but I'm also going to help you get through it, or whatever it is. So the Teach Tool is just my 5 steps for conflict resolution, peaceful conflict resolution, to help people find their way through navigating all those feelings and needs that can sort of set us off and trigger us into those negative patterns.
Okay. Oh, no, Angelina's going to say something. Okay, by Angelina, I meant me, sorry. But it's okay because it actually is talking about something that you were saying before, Angelina. And, you know, when you were talking about humour, and I think because as well as having my kids, I also teach music from home. We have a music tuition business, but it's not like a normal music tuition business. We don't do we don't do grading or tests or any of that kind of stuff. We just basically get the kids to come in. Don't worry, I'm going somewhere with this, it's okay. We get the kids to come in, we get to know the kids, and then based on what music that child likes and whether or not they actually care about learning notation or they just want to play some songs, we just go with what that individual child wants and make a spontaneous program lesson to lesson based on that. And where humour comes into that is because some kids are harder to engage in others, and it's always different when it's not your own children and it's not someone in your normal day-to-day life that you haven't built up a rapport with yet. And humour and building up a rapport, I think, are really, really, really important communication tools, like you were saying. I think the parents sometimes find that harder to deal with. There's an example of a child who really kind of didn't want to be there, and he was resistant and he was tuning out, so he just wanted to talk about Call of Duty. So I pretended that we were playing piano Call of Duty, and every time he got to the end of the scale, he got to shoot me. And his parents walked in and I was going and like falling down on the floor and making this whole big scene. It was his first lesson and he never came back. They never brought him back. But the thing is, by the end of the lesson, I taught him 3 songs and he knew 2 scales. First lesson ever. I thought it was a success. But yeah, humour. Humour is a way where you can actually start to build that rapport, which this is less of a parenting thing and more of a, a few of you work with kids outside of home and outside of family. And I think building up a connection is so important when you're communicating with someone. You can't go in there with no rapport and communicate. Now, I kind of was going off on a tangent here, so I'm going to hand it back over to Angelina now. Sorry.
Thank you. I love that. And, again, it's knowing your audience and knowing the child. For some children, humor can cut so deeply and can be exactly the opposite of what they need. And others who are more aggressive and more like this, it can be the thing to kind of open up that rapport. And so it just so depends on the individual temperament and the child and, how they kind of bring themselves to the world and knowing the difference, because children, as adults they're not all one size fits all by any means. So we can't, say this works across the board. But, knowing kind of when and how, and sometimes humor can just be so good, like you said, for that particular child who, it was like meeting him, right? And we could go on these, again, down this route of judgment and say, oh, we don't do guns, oh, nonviolent communication, nonviolent this, but for you to tune into that child and know what was going to work with him, that's, I think, the skill of just being like an intuitive communicator, and that's vital, knowing exactly where their hook is. How can I reach this person, this child? So, but I was going to go back with sometimes just, the tools for my parents. I feel like a lot of those, when they get too many steps, it just, they forget all of them. And so what I typically tell my parents is, if they're honest and respectful, like just remember those 2 things, because I think preschools all schools, but particularly in preschools when they're just teaching children manners and all those things, respectful has been like in it for a long time. Say sorry, say this, say that. That's not honest, right? Because a child might not be sorry and they don't know. We don't in typical, we don't take the time to care. So it's going to be honest and respectful. And I see that often with parents as well. They try to be so respectful if they're trying to go this conscious route, but they're not honest with their kids. And I think that does so much damage for a child's intuition, right? Because I think I think it was actually Lori in the beginning was saying, she intuited what was happening in her family, and then the language was like saying something else. So when these parents are like, it's okay, or, they're taking this, we might call it spiritual bypass, or, different things. I just keep thinking of J.P. Sears. I saw him recently, the ultra spiritual guy, and he just makes me laugh so much because what, he kind of says is how, these people that once they reach this conscious or spiritual realm, there's a lot of spiritual bypass going on. And so we lose honesty. But if we can just be honest and respectful at the same time, I think that's going to get people 90 to 95% of the way there. And, the kids can take it. The kids can take it if a parent says, you know what, I'm just feeling like I don't even want to be a mom right now. I don't want to make dinner. I don't want to adult. I don't feel like doing it either, and I'm just having a hard day. But they're not yelling and they're not attacking. They're not displacing the anger. That does a lot for a child to just hear it, instead of pretending that something else is going on and trying to, come up with all the right words and I'm feeling blah, 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 make it all flowery when, the honesty is lacking. So those are my two big ones, honest and respectful.
I think a tool that that we need to use, and this is just really short, is just that it tags on what Angelina just said, and that's that we need to, in situations, try to heed the inner voice, try to heed the intuitive voice when we are thinking of responding in a conflict or just in general communication. We have to try to stop ourselves, which also goes back to what Lori was initially saying about, with the T, to I think it was think, was it? I might be wrong. But somewhere along the line, someone said to step back and, think about the thoughts that are coming to your head. I would just say that my biggest tool is trying to listen to the voice that's trying to come through.
Here on property, we also, in addition to NVC, can't hear me. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. In addition to nonviolent communication, we also use agreements. The biggest one that's been coming up recently is taking things personally. I think can also be another one that can be really helpful. There's two other ones also. There's four in the 4 agreements here. But I find that for myself, when I'm not taking things personally, it's so easy when somebody is, somebody can do anything, whatever it is that they're doing, whether they're yelling or they're crying or they're blaming me or whatever. And if I'm able to just know that it's not about me, that they have something that's needing to express or whatever, then it's so much easier for me to be able to be present for them and just be able to listen to them. Because I find for myself that there's like 2 parts of communication. One of them is kind of like an emotional process, and it includes venting or space to get out so that it's done and I can move on to the thing. Like I learn whatever's coming up rather than continuing to suppress it because I have judgment around what it is or how it's going to come out or whatever, but being able to be in a safe space where I can just, express whatever it is I need to express. And then once I've kind of gotten all of that out, then I can step more fully into the intentional language, the intentional communication. And, a big part of that is consent. A big part of that is checking in with the person and saying, hey, I'm having a rough day and I have somebody to just like blow it to. Are you down for that? And then let me know if you're, if it's too much. And we're safe for each other. Um, and so again, when it comes to, not taking things personally, it's really hold space for somebody, when they're needing to emote or, because oftentimes you hold in for so long, especially about our childhoods and, like we are carrying around wounds from the past. It's hard to be able to express those things in a way that really releases them. And so being able to have a safe space to be able to do that. And then the other side is, being able to speak intentionally. And so for me, when I'm engaging with the world, I'm being one of those two kind of places, where they're.
Yikes. It sounds like Nova's connection just cut out. We're just going to cross our fingers that she's able to rejoin us. But I do agree that she was saying about consent. That really needs to be a part of the whole conversation. And also, before we went to break, I do believe somebody mentioned that they had an epiphany that to apply nonviolent communication, the other person that you're speaking to doesn't have to be also speaking to you in that manner. And I think that's a huge tool, just that realization and knowing that people can, put in their tool belt when they are trying to be very conscious with their communication with those that are not applying conscious communication. That if you indeed as the communicator are very intentional and to communicate without the expectations of how they're replying back, it eases everything up. And it's, as somebody said earlier in the first hour, it softens the situation. And I thought that was beautifully put. So thank you for that. I want to shift gears just a little bit before we run out of time. I want to check in with the panel and see what your thoughts are. We've got unschoolers and we have traditional schoolers or alternative education, with the Waldorf. I want to know in what manner, through your experience, conscious communication affects learning. So either from the perspective of a parent or from the perspective of a teacher or from the perspective of an observer. So I'd like to, if you can, wrap your head a little bit around how learning becomes part of conscious communication from where you're standing. So I'm just going to open that up to the panel.
I can speak to that if no one wants to jump in. I think we talked about earlier that this communication is about relationships. Somebody, I think it might have been Nancy saying about it, and the connection. So it came up in that, and that's so important because without that relationship, without that connection there, children can't learn. So we don't really set up the conditions for them for learning to happen unless we're being respectful. If we're being judgmental or critical or shutting them down with blame and shame, we shut down their learning centers, right? We shut down their memory. We put them into their stress response mode and no learning happens. So it's a critical part, which is why I think traditional education for older children that maybe have been given that time to really develop their sense of self so that they can withstand those environments, children that can, I think, I went on a tangent. I don't even know where I was going with that. However, I think that it's imperative if we want children to learn. I think that it affects younger children more because they don't, like I said, they haven't had that time to sort of develop their sense of self, know that, whatever the teacher is saying or their peers or in these, in classrooms and things where kids are sort of controlled to, ask when they have to go to the bathroom or when they can eat or when they can stand up and sit down. That's really stressful for children. So in that environment, I think that we're shutting down the learning for a lot of kids. I don't know that there's a way around that, except calling it out for what it is and letting teachers know and letting parents know that this is what's happening so that we can collectively, whether our kids are in school or not, say this is not appropriate for children. I find that the practices of most schools are so developmentally inappropriate. How can children learn from people that they don't trust? And we're constantly breaking that trust when we're using punitive practices in school. So I know everybody else has probably a lot to say on it, but I think it's critical to the learning process, and learning isn't happening unless we're speaking this way to our kids or to anybody. Even in corporate workplaces, productivity comes from people feeling autonomous and feeling like they contribute. And so that's, I think, what conscious communication brings us. It brings us that ability for people to contribute their thoughts and to express themselves and to feel like they have something to offer. And I get off my soapbox now and let somebody else talk, but it's so, so important.
I think that one of the things that we can do now, and this might work to some degree in a structured environment, but for us, it's unschooling, but is to just try to replace no with yes whenever possible. And, even if you still struggle with that, really ask yourself, what is the real reason that I'm saying no? I'll give you an example. My son likes to smash things, and, he likes to find old toys and he wants to smash them. And, the old me would have said, oh, no, someone gave you that toy or that's a special keepsake. But now, in respecting that it belongs to him and respecting that he has sovereignty over things that are his, I say yes. And I had a mouse go bad this morning, and I said, oh, this would be a nice thing for him to smash. So I said, hey, you want to smash this? And he says, oh, yeah, where's the hammer? He starts, doors start flying open, and he's really enjoying this. And I think there's a learning process in there too, because he's curious and he's satisfying a curiosity, what's inside of this. So just saying yes as much as possible. If it's not hurting you, them, or someone else, say yes.
Okay, so much of what Lori said, with learning can't happen, just from straight up brain research right now. It's like, how she's saying, most schools are developmentally inappropriate. It's very much like our food pyramid, the government. It's like how to be obese and diabetic if you follow the food pyramid. So that's like the government saying, eat like this, and, everyone's getting sick from eating that way. Our education system, I think, is so much the same. It's totally developmentally inappropriate. And if you look at brain research, it goes completely contradictory to the standard school system. Because the brain, we do go offline. Our prefrontal cortex appears where higher learning happens. And when we're in a stress response, it shuts down. And children literally don't have access to the parts of their brain that can be accessed for learning. So, it can't happen. It truly can't, like Lori was saying. So, what's the resolution? I mean, one of the things I do is go in for social inclusion into junior high and work on, group dynamics and stuff within the junior high. And one of the things I will do in the class is ask, okay, if, we set up a list of agreements for the class, it's all written by them. And then I'll say, so what are the consequences if somebody breaks these agreements? And in the beginning, it's amazing, even in an alternative setting that's not really been that punitive, that the children typically first come with punitive consequences for each other that they're making up, right? These aren't the teachers. The children are still themselves saying, I think there should be, detention and this, or let's make a jail in the corner and we'll lock people in there. I'm like, a jail? And so then little by little, we'll start to unpack that and what's the benefit of punitive action. And they'll start to see it. So, I mean, really, what is the thing? It's education. It's, giving them the pieces. And then when we come up eventually, kind of guide them into a more cooperative model of, what if we talk to each other? What if, and again, like leading them through it, it's the shortcut to just say, we had an agreement and I saw that you didn't meet it and it kind of hurts my feelings. I was like, what if it's just open communication? What if there's no external consequence that we have to apply? Would you guys be comfortable? And then to start to have that conversation with each other of how do I want to receive it? What language do I like to receive it in? How do I want to be called out? And then they really work on this whole new model of, can we really just communicate with each other when we feel we've been violated by each other and this code of conduct that we've set up for ourselves? It's very doable. Within a few class meetings, the class has come up with this and shifted, and we can absolutely bring that kind of stuff all the way down to a much younger, to where everyone's feeling safe and they feel comfortable just sharing with each other. And then the teacher, because the teacher's in the room as well, and a lot of times she's like, when they're saying detention, she's kind of loving it in the beginning of like how strict they are. And then, I keep unpacking it to like, well, we're not doing consequences like that. But then, the teacher will really grasp the whole thing as well. And to just say, oh, that's an option. To just really, if a child's disruptive in a class, can we just walk right up to that child and say, is there something you really need to express right now? Because I want to keep on with the lesson. And if you have something you really want to express, I would like to hear it. And then we can still put parameters around it and boundaries around it and say, I'm going to table it to the end of the lesson, but I want to hear you. And sometimes just that being seen is enough for it to go away, and they'll say, yeah, I can wait. Because we hit all these battles and then all these power struggles and other things, and no one's learning because then it's like yelling louder and louder and louder. But can we just open lines truly of communication? And I will say, from having done it in classrooms, absolutely we can, and it's not that difficult. Just a little paradigm shift.
I think what we have to remember is that kids are going to learn when there's intrinsic motivation. And, the communication, when it's authentic, is more likely to lead to that than the punitive, notions and restrictions and whatnot. That's all that I had to say.
I was thinking about authenticity and also inauthenticity. And I think that oftentimes in public school, like we've talked about, there's this almost ingrained structure of inauthenticity, right? Because kids are learning about dogs and trees and measurements on pieces of paper, rather than having actual experiences, right? There's this, top-down model of learning where I have this information that I think is perfect for you to, know. And there's this, structure of like, I need these 30 students to learn this amount of information so that they can move on to the next teacher, and then they learn that amount of information so they move on to the next. And it's not really speaking to the children themselves and what they want to learn. And so, the school in and of itself is kind of presenting itself in this inauthentic manner, and then at the same time, it gives it makes it less possible for the children to be able to be authentic. If you think about it, oftentimes kids get in trouble at school because they talk. Socialization is one of the biggest things that they get in trouble for and things like that. And there's just this this inability to really be able to, to relate and have some kind of say over what's meaningful to them and be able to bring that in. And I loved what Angelina was explaining about, being able to set up these, these conversations and such to create, authentic parameters around, conflict resolution and stuff. And I feel like those kinds of conversations could happen around learning in classrooms. So what do you guys want to learn? And get kids involved in the process of it. I was going to say also that there's this saying that I can't even remember where I heard from forever ago that just always comes up for me, and it's take the time it takes and it will take less time. And it's all about, again, that building the, oh my gosh, the whatever that R word was, that was fantastic. But, taking the time to build that relationship with people, taking the time to set the foundation really solid, because like for myself with my kids, I move very slowly and intentionally with my children from day one. And now I can say, hey, can you not do that? And it's just like, it's okay. But if I didn't have that relationship with them, if I was always harsh, then it would be taken in a harsh way. But because we took this time, and I've thought about this in terms of other relationships also. I remember I had a friend that came and stayed with us, and I remember we spent the first 2 weeks talking for hours and hours and hours on end, really getting to know each other, so that as we were figuring out dynamics around, my house and our shared space, it would be so much easier and more comfortable to be able to be honest and authentic, because we built this, this solid foundation around our relationship. And so, yeah, take the time it takes and it will take less time. It's been kind of a big motto for me, especially I've been thinking about it a lot with the tribe here and just building relationships in general.
Okay, I have something short and sweet. It's not actually sweet, but it's short. Best example of the difference in how communication forms someone's perception and personality, especially with children, the communication style they're surrounded by. If you can compare basically comparisons are horrible. I don't like comparisons, but they're useful, so I'm using one. If you compare any unschooled child who has always been unschooled and look at the way that they relate to the adults around them, and generally you'll see that kids of all ages just treat adults as another potential friend, another person, another mentor, depending on the role in that person's life. Then compare that with any child who has always gone to school. There is always a really, really big difference in the way that they communicate and relate. And I just think if anyone has any doubt that respectful communication is inferior somehow to a traditional school environment, then I think that's really all you need to think about. That's it.
That was short and sweet. We have basically ran out of time, so I'm going to go around to each of our panelists and ask you to share a final thought, a closing remark, and I also invite you to share your projects and websites, anything that you're working on, and anything that you wish to share with our audience. Now, I can't believe 2 hours have flown by so quickly. So I'm going to just open up the floor to whoever would like to jump in first with their final thoughts.
I'll go. I think that I have one motto that I say to all of I follow it. I say it to all of my parents. It's just about being conscious and not about being perfect. So consciousness, not perfection. If we can just remember that, because again, the judgment on ourselves and on our peers and on other parents or teachers or family, that doesn't need to be there either. If we can just accept that we all make mistakes, that we all, we judge people, and then, we can look back and say, okay, what was I really feeling or needing? Just be conscious. Don't be judgmental of yourself. It's not about perfection. It's really just about learning to be honest and authentic and create relationships like we've all been speaking about here. And I you guys can find me at teachthroughlove.com. I'm on Facebook. I have every Monday I do, I call Mindful Mondays on Facebook, and I post my conscious communication cards, which are just these translations. That's what we would normally hear, the traditional sort of blaming, shaming, judgmental, critical things that we hear come out of our mouths as parents or come out at the playground. And then I transform that language into what we can say that's more respectful by still setting limits, though. You know, not taking away our leadership, not taking away our ability to set boundaries, but just doing it in a way that doesn't blame the child for their inability, for their lack of skill, or for their, you know, need for connection. So that's my contribution to, you know, helping families. If we can just have some kind of language that shifts, you know, just a couple of words here and there, it makes all the difference, really. And thank you, Lainey. Thank you so much for doing this and for gathering this amazing panel too. And we're all out there in our parts of the world, sort of, like I said, planting these seeds, and I think it's amazing.
I'm a little distracted because when my son just left to go to martial arts a few minutes ago, he has to walk for the first time. It's just a few blocks. And I told him to let the dog out, and he let the dog out, but he let her out in the house. So she's been running around, jumping on me, eating the cat food, drinking the water. But, you know, I think it's funny. I'll have a good laugh when he gets back about it. But anyway, I look at this process as a holistic thing. You know, the whole consciousness in how we communicate, it applies to how we view ourselves as well. And forgiveness, self-forgiveness, constantly forgiving myself is something that I try to do. I draw a line in the sand and say, this is a new day. You know, I make mistakes. And, you know, I really liked, and forgive me, I don't even remember who it was because I was so distracted by the dog who said it, but they were talking about the authenticity of the communicating and how you can afford to be human. And, you know, and it doesn't cause relationship problems because the relationship is solid and respectful. And therefore, you know, what you're modeling is holding the space for the other person, whether it be your child or otherwise. And then in turn, you know, the more you do that, the more they'll do that for you. And then you start doing it for yourself. And I work on this continual self-improvement in my life, and I blog a little bit. I'd like to blog more at Process on WordPress, and there's a Facebook page that coincides with that called Process as well. And you know, I look forward to, you know, the next time that I can participate, you know, maybe having a whole new growth spurt underway and reinventing myself yet again. So thank you very much, Lainey. And this is just a fabulous group of panelists, and I'm honored to have participated.
You're also lovely, and I've had so much fun talking to you. And Lainey, I've loved being here with you. It's really exciting. I just have 3 things to say. That was the first one. The second one is if there is one takeaway, if you're listening to this, it's just whether you're a teacher or a parent, just have fun and be kind. That's it. Have fun, be kind. As for websites, you can find me on Facebook. If you want to, you can stalk me, I don't mind, or Instagram, or you can go to the website, which isn't even my website, it's my daughter's website, but she's cool. It's www.turnerbooks.com.au. She's trying to start up a business, and it's kind of a family thing. We're all pitching in, but it's her baby. So if you guys want to go and check that out, go for it. And thank you so much. It's lovely meeting you all, and yeah, it's been really fun. Thank you. And thanks, Lainey.
Okay, I have an unruly dog in my presence as well. Who's just taking the doll apart. So my takeaway, if I could leave a takeaway, there's a saying that is how we are with ourselves as we go through the issue is the issue. And so, if we're trying to take on this new work, a lot of times there's so much self-judgment that comes up from parents because they feel like they haven't done it right up until now. And just remember, how you are with yourself really is the most important part. Because if you're going to be hard on yourself, you're continuing that path of violence towards yourself. So we have to really be kind with ourselves, be patient with ourselves. As Margaret said, self-forgiveness is huge, and just to realize we're doing the best we can. Today's a new day, and just go for that progress and not perfection, similar to what Lori was saying. Baby step our way through a whole new way of learning and being in the world, and kindness towards ourselves is imperative. We can't be hard on ourselves and kind to our children. It just doesn't work, because that, again, is the dishonest part, where the children feel it because they're intuitive. And so we just have to find a way to let ourselves off the hook and do the best we can in every single day. I can also be found on Facebook, Instagram, Angelina Hart. My preschool website is organicbeginningspreschool.com. And thank you so much, Lainey, for having me and for having this. It's been amazing, and speaking with all of you wonderful women.
So my share is so similar to all of you lovely ladies that I've just had such a pleasure being connected with on this call. I'm so grateful. And I wanted to share that we can only know others to the capacity that we know ourselves. And so the more we know ourselves, the more we forgive ourselves, the more space we give ourselves, the more we're able to do this for others. And so if you find yourself struggling with something with someone, reflecting back inside and forgiving yourself for the times when you were like that, or, just really giving yourself a love bath, and just being able to be present for yourself, because the more we're able to be present for ourselves, the more we're able to be present for others in whatever state they find themselves. And I think that's kind of the key to it all.
Thank you all. Thank you so much. This has been an incredible, inspiring conversation. I've learned so much from each one of you. Thank you. I am so grateful also to have been able to spend the last 2 hours with you all. I also want to thank Mel and Biggie over at Conscious Consumer Network. Thank you for providing the platform for us to broadcast on. We're just so grateful to have this honor. And thank you to Katie, who sat behind the scenes as one of our new co-producers. So we're welcoming you officially to the family and look forward to seeing what you produce in the future. Finally, I just want to say, wherever you are and whatever you do, continue to always do it for the love of learning.
If we want to change the world, we must first change the media. Mainstream media exists for the purposes of indoctrination and manipulation of public perception. The world of free and independent media is growing, and with the upsurge in information now available in the public domain, it has never been easier to access free and independent media. The exploration of this information resulted in an experimental project which would provide a fully supported space for researchers, whistleblowers, and seekers of all kinds to express themselves and educate the world. On the 1st of January 2015, Conscious Consumer Network was launched to the world. Nobody thought we would make it this far, but CCN is the longest running free and independent media network of its kind. CCN is a unique collaboration of hearts and souls, bringing you information from different perspectives to educate and inform. Since we started CCN, we have had only one desire: the pursuit of a free, fair, just, sustainable world, and this has not changed. Having overcome many challenges over the last 2 years, CCN is here to stay, and we've got great things lined up for 2017. Help keep CCN on the air by supporting the 2017 Network Support Fund.